The German federal elections marks a pivotal moment, not just for Germany, but for Europe's security landscape. Exit polls currently show Friedrich Merz, CDU-CSU, leading at around 30% and the AfD securing a historic 20%. The SPD has fallen to a record low, raising questions about coalition building and policy direction. What do these results mean for European security, NATO, and Germany's global role? Joining us today on TVP World to discuss is Daniela Schwarzer, Executive Board Member of the Bertelsmann Stiftung. Hello, ma'am, and welcome to TVP World.
Good evening. Hello.
So, how do you see the outcome of this German election shaping European defense going forward?
Well, the biggest question is how long it will take to shape a government and obviously what the coalition will be. And there's one big unknown, and that is whether two small parties who are who polled at around 5% and are now just below 5% in the estimated results, whether they will actually make it into parliament. Because if they do, government formation will be more difficult. Then a coalition of the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats won't have the necessary majority of seats, and thus they will need a third partner. So coalition negotiations can be long, and it's more difficult to predict which foreign policy position the new coalition will then take. But what we know is that Friedrich Merz, who will be the next chancellor, has taken very clear positions during the electoral campaign. For instance, on support for Ukraine, on sanctions on Russia. He has been recently at the Munich Security Conference very critical of recent developments in Washington, D.C., such as negotiating directly with Russia without Ukraine. And so I think he will very probably push any new coalition to more investment in Ukraine security, and progress with regards to European defense cooperation as the European pillar within NATO.
All right, you mentioned that there is still a little bit of uncertainty when it comes to coalition building, and there might still be a few speed bumps when it comes to forming a government. Can you give us a little bit of insight into some of these nuances? What are some of the possibilities and what you think might be the most likely outcome?
Well, we have two parties of which we don't know whether they will make it into parliament. One of them are the Liberals, who were in the previous government and who are a potential coalition partner for the Christian Democrats led by Friedrich Merz. If they don't make it in, then he basically only has two other partners with whom he can negotiate, the Social Democrats and the Greens. Then there is another party which right now is not sure to make it into parliament. That is a far-left party created by a far-left politician who has been around for a very long time and who has basically split the far-left. Her own party, BSW, may make it into parliament. If so, again, that will have consequences for Friedrich Merz's coalition formation, because in that scenario, he will need a third party, and we may end up with a coalition made up of Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, and then either Liberals or Greens. And that would be a far more complex negotiation process to agree on a coalition treaty and the distribution of government jobs.
Right. And going back to what you mentioned before, Friedrich Merz himself has been an outspoken proponent of closer ties between Germany, Poland, and France, otherwise known as the Weimar Triangle. How do you think that this vision might enhance trilateral cooperation? And can we see any sort of a concrete step when it comes to these relationships going forward?
Well, first of all, he has said that very symbolically he will use his first day in office to travel to Warsaw and to Paris. And I think that already is a very strong signal. Usually German chancellors travel to Paris on their first or maybe second day in office, and then a little later to Poland, the United States, the UK, and others. So he clearly bets on the three players within the European Union, Poland, France, and Germany. And I think it makes even more sense now that there is a huge urgency to act within the European Union or among EU member states to bring forward defense efforts. Because if Europe wants to play a role, first of all, in the way a potential agreement with Russia and Ukraine is being found, Europeans have to be ready and have to be able to say what they will be contributing both to the stabilization of Ukraine, but also more importantly and directly connected to Europe's future security order. There's a very high likelihood that the United States will withdraw, first of all, from support for Ukraine. Maybe not entirely, but it will reduce support. And then, secondly, there's the big question mark whether the US will withdraw troops from Europe, which is why, for instance, France and the UK seem to have already discussed the question of ground troops into Ukraine and on the eastern flank of NATO. So I think there will be a lot of movement in the next few weeks, and it's very important that Germany has clarity on the political setup as soon as possible. And I believe that Friedrich Merz, as the very probable next chancellor, he sees that, and he recently really spoke about the first steps he will need to make, and he shows that he understands the sense of urgency.
All right, and speaking of relationship between Germany and Poland, there's recently a new treaty that's been promised by Mr. Merz. What benefits do you think that this could lead to?
Well, I think in general, Polish-German relations need a real push. There has been a lot of political tension going back to the previous Polish government of PIS. And I would say that there is now a huge opportunity with a new government and leadership in Poland and a new government coalition and chancellor in Germany to really look at a number of things that we can work on together. We have already discussed defense and security. That is key. Poland is very invested with a very strong defense budget. Germany still is in a catch-up process. But the question is, of course, how do we spend money in the best possible way in the European Union together? So that's one thing. The other, I think, very important question for Germany and Poland is how can very solid ties between the countries be built? And Germany has a very, very long, decade-old tradition of really building close ties and building even societal ties, city ties, economic ties with France. And I think the moment is now to look into German-Polish relations and ask ourselves together, what is the most beneficial way forward to increase mobility, to increase cooperation, to increase mutual understanding? And that also includes, of course, the question of how we deal with history, which always pushes back onto the Polish agenda in a way that it no longer happens in Franco-German relations. So I think this work of remembering together, of discussing what was in the past and where we go together in the future, there's still a lot to do. And that is not only a question for policymakers, but it needs to go deep down in society, into youth meeting, into school exchanges, students traveling across borders. So there are very many things we can do in the bilateral relationship below the level of high politics, where security, defense, economic security, and European integration, of course, on the government level will also play a very important role.
All right. And going back to the Ukraine topic, we do know, like you mentioned before, Mr. Friedrich Merz is a very strong proponent of support for Ukraine. But with the peace talk on the horizon, and there's still a lot of uncertainty, do you think that if the United States forced Ukraine into a deal that is fundamentally flawed or is not as favorable to Ukraine, do you think Germany will be ready to accept that sort of deal?
Well, it's up to Ukraine to accept that deal. It's not up to Germany. But the question, of course, is what happens if either Ukraine accepts a deal, and I wouldn't isolate Germany here. I think Poland will also have a very detailed view on what kind of deal is good and how could it be supported. I think Europeans will have to stand together then, because it's very likely that any deal will not have a strong security support from the US side. And given the fact that Vladimir Putin has not given up his aims in the war on Ukraine, he has a very expansionist view. He's a very aggressive leader in Russia. So security, even if there is a deal, security and also deterrence remains high on the European agenda. And this is why I think any Ukraine deal that the Ukrainian government accepts from the German and the European perspective has to be seen in a wider context of the new European security order. And that's where the dialogue between European partners becomes so essential, because we as Europeans will have to play a stronger role than in the past of stabilizing our continent and really ensuring that this new emerging security order holds. And that means more investment into defense, and also a really serious question for all Europeans together, at least the NATO members: how do we secure the eastern flank of our defense alliance if the US either withdraw or reduce their commitment?
Right. And looking at the exit poll, one of the numbers that do bring up some attention is German Chancellor Olaf Scholz' SPD party taking essentially what is considered a nosedive. Do you think that he will have to resign after this?
Well, he has already said that he would not be personally part of a government that he doesn't lead. So he's not a candidate for any ministerial office. Other than that, there's really not much he can step down from, because he is not the party leader of the Social Democrats. There are two party leaders who tonight at least have not signaled in any way that they would step down. But of course, this is the question the party will have to answer in the days to come. When Olaf Scholz withdraws, which he will likely, I mean, he's still the caretaker chancellor until a new government is in place, but he said he will play no future role. So it's very likely that the two party co-chairs, that they are the ones who will guide the party into coalition negotiations. And there's also a very strong politician who is probably quite well known also in Poland, our defense minister, Boris Pistorius. He's a social democrat, and he's actually the most liked politician in Germany. So although he has no party office, he will surely play a role in the next weeks to come, and is likely also a member of the next German government.
Right. And here's a topic that I would like to pick your brains on. Observing the phenomenon where, United States' Elon Musk as well as J.D. Vance essentially put their faith in the AfD party, backing them up. But throughout these past couple of weeks, the polling number for the party seems relatively stable, and the exit polls also showed that these two individuals didn't really sway the voters very much. Is this a litmus test when it comes to American influence in European politics, that perhaps their presence here isn't as influential as many led to believe?
Well, the far-right party AfD has polled consistently high for a number of months, maybe not at 20%, as it now turns out to have scored in the elections, but at 18, 19, sometimes 17%, so it has been pretty stable. It has not really visibly benefited from Elon Musk's intervention in the domestic electoral campaign. And he has chosen really to give the party leader, Alice Weidel, a very visible platform, because he interviewed her for long on his platform X, and that has given her access really to very many people. And then J.D. Vance intervened at the Munich Security Conference and said, criticized basically the mainstream parties in Germany, and again made a case for the far right. And it looks like really people didn't particularly react to that. I think as a democracy, we have to deal with the rise of the far right in a cautious way. We have to understand better why people decide to vote for them. But in terms of American intervention in this election, I think there's no proof that this has really changed the outcome of the election. But of course, it is unacceptable to see two people intervene in that way into a democratic election of a partner country and ally, in fact.
Right. And last but not least, do you think that finally Germany will be seeing the dedication of the NATO benchmark of 2% GDP into defense?
Yes, that's very likely. I mean, the budgetary planning, the budget for this running year has not been confirmed, obviously, because we only had a caretaker government. So this is top on the agenda. And actually, the debate in Berlin is already how we go beyond 2%, because it's not because of the pressure that comes out of Washington, D.C., but really the realization that we are facing a different security situation on our continent. So the next few weeks, once the coalition negotiations advance, thus will also concern the question of how this funding can be provided that we need to secure Europe and Germany. And that means we have to look into the question what to do with our constitutional rule. We have a debt brake which limits public expenditure and deficits. And also there's a European rule, the Stability and Growth Pact. And it is very likely that the next government will have to take a pragmatic stance, because we all know that defense needs more funding in the future. And at the same time, Germany has a very long agenda on other priorities which also need funding. Modernization of infrastructure is just one, investment into education, digitization. There are many things to do. So I believe we will see more flexibility on the budgetary rule side.
Right. Thank you so much for all your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Good night.
And thank you for watching this edition of World News Tonight. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.